Now that gap, incidentally, exists everywhere, even in developed countries. It exists in the United States. You have a chap in the United States by the name of Mr. Bill Gates, who has $80 billion in his pocket. And I'm sure that there are people here who may have only $8 in their pocket. And so the gap is great in the United States too. But in Pakistan, we have that, and you see this in many other developing countries, particularly in Latin America, of the super rich who live in palatial residences with high walls and armed guards inside, and the average poor who are just running around making do and surviving with their noses half a centimeter out of the water. Now, this type of gap is not sustainable except by building up what is called the middle class. And the size of the middle class in Pakistan is inadequate. And the result is that this is a serious fault line. And so much of the work that is being done not to trickle down economics or to trickle up economics, but to expand the middle class in the middle, because that is the only guarantee of a safe and secure future. Economics determines a lot of our political life and our safety and security. A third fault line exists in Pakistan between the civilians and the army. Pakistan is, you can call it a democracy if you wish, but it is not a democracy at all. It's a solid military dictatorship. And the military in Pakistan has run the political life of the country for close to 40 years. Now, this is not like the military in Latin America, in which Mr. Pinochet just takes over power and runs the country. The army in Pakistan is, in many ways, a political party by itself. It comes out of the people. It's a large army. The army of Pakistan is close to 1 million people. But yet, it is only 0.75% of the population. And yet, it comes out of the population. And so these army people, the soldiers, ultimately have to go back and spend their vacations with their family, and their families are civilians. And so there is an interplay between the civilian life and the army itself. Unfortunately, what has happened recently is that the army has embarked on its own course of action. And I think this is largely due to the war on terror, in which people here are so interested, and President Bush, in which they are also equally interested, and the fact that President Bush has given outright support in Pakistan to an army and to a president who basically is not liked by the civilian population. And so during this visit of mine to Pakistan, and I had gone back literally after 10 years, because after retirement, I did not go back to Pakistan because most of my work was here with the United Nations. And I was surprised to see the degree of revulsion which exists in the civilian population against the army. Now, this is serious. This is a serious fault line, because the army is the most important institution in Pakistan. It is highly structured, it is highly disciplined, it is highly well-informed and educated, and it is, after all, the guarantor of the national sovereignty and territorial integrity of Pakistan. And therefore, to have an important institution debased because of local revulsion is going to have serious consequences. And therefore, we need to analyze. And my own analysis is that this revulsion has occurred because of the foreign policy interests of the United States in Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the very narrow manner in which they were focused on the army. And then there is a fourth gap. And the fourth fault line is within the army itself, because I found that the army, which had always been a very unified institution, now is debating itself. And so you find that there are people inside the army speaking against their own officers. This had never happened in the past. It was a very disciplined army. But somehow the credibility of the senior officers is now being questioned by the junior officers and by the soldiers. And so it's a fault line, but a hopeful fault line, because if everybody agrees, you're going to go nowhere. If we all agree, we are all earthworms. But it is only through disagreement that debate and analysis takes place. And that disagreement has started within this most important institution, which is a political party, which is the army in Pakistan. So four fault lines, and all of these, as you can well imagine, are negatives. But these negatives might lead you into believing that Pakistan is in deep trouble. And that is where you go wrong. Pakistan is not in trouble. It is not a failed state. It is not a failing state. Not at all. It's a working state. And you'd be surprised when you go, if you go to Pakistan. First of all, despite all that you hear, you will not see anybody in Pakistan standing or sitting and smoking a cigarette. Everybody is walking and running, which means that there is an effervescence in country. It's an economic effervescence. Everybody is doing something. And that is remarkable, which means people have objectives for which they are working and running, etc. Now, you would then say, but the statistics about Pakistan are so negative. If everybody is working, where's the money? What's the result? And this now brings you to an extraordinary thing in Pakistan, which is that less than 40% of the country is above the table. 60% is under the table. 60% of the economy of Pakistan is outside the control of government. These are the small workshops, the small farms, the small enterprises who don't care two hoots for the government and who work and who produce, and they are the ones who are keeping this country running. And they don't pay taxes, which is the main thing. Because I remember when I was a student in France, I was always told that France was a country of the highest rate of taxation in the world, fortunately tempered by the highest rate of tax evasion in the world. And I now find that that's not true, because the French have everything to learn from Pakistan, which is not to evade taxes, but just don't pay them. And 60% of the population pays nothing and doesn't care about the government. So it's not a negative, this is a positive. That's what makes Pakistan work. It's a hard-working population with high creativity, some of which may be questionable creativity. I always tell my friends two jokes, and one of them is that Pakistanis, incidentally, are experts in doing the wrong thing and doing it with great creativity. And so I remember that there were two Pakistani IT specialists who had studied computer technology, and they wrote in a letter to Microsoft saying, we would like to work with Microsoft. And Microsoft wrote back to them, go to hell. This is not how we employ people, through a letter written from some outlandish country called Pakistan. And so these two Pakistanis brilliantly devised a virus, introduced the virus into the Microsoft mainframe, and then wrote to Microsoft and said, we have introduced this virus into your mainframe. See if you can analyze it and do something about it. And Microsoft examined the virus and found that it was pure genius. And then wrote to these two to say, come, we'll employ you. And they're both working for Microsoft in Seattle now. So this type of thing Pakistanis are good at. And again, at some stage, if I'm in a good mood, I will tell you how the Pakistanis found the hole in the Berlin Wall. Only the Pakistanis found that hole and used it for years until the Germans discovered that what had happened, and they had to ultimately change their constitution. A constitutional amendment had to occur in Germany because of the hole in the Berlin Wall, which the Pakistanis had discovered. So there's much to Pakistan. Now, the third most important thing, the positive about Pakistan, is that Pakistan